viewers. It's James Kalm, your half-assed reporter. And we're down at the bottom of Soho. We're gonna run in here to the drawing center. And we're gonna try to get some pictures of an exhibition by Neil Rausch.
So we'll say it again.
Yeah.
Welcome, Loren.
Welcome, Loren.
Nice to see you, Charles and Marc.
Yeah, aka James
Great to
Kalm.
see you.
And we were just talking before you came on that in many ways the James Kalm report is an inspiration for what we're doing.
Thank you.
In every way, in fact.
Don't blame it on me.
Don't blame it on
We've been watching the James Kalm report for over a decade. And for a number of years ago, I said to Charlie, you should be doing this for Toronto artists. Go around.
Yeah.
Charlie's also a man on a bike. He's a major cyclist.
Yeah.
Go around to the galleries with your camera and record this great work for posterity. And I know Charlie was always very interested in doing so, but it's only since I think last year that he realized that the camera in his phone is quite good.
Yeah. So for years, as Marc is saying, he had suggested I do, but in many ways, I was kind of estranged from the local scene. And, Marc and I both live in the East End, and the art scene is in the West End here. So it's, it's like 15 kilometers across town. So, but as Marc was saying, I got this new camera and it had an amazing, phone. It had an amazing camera, and it was just like, why not? Let's just start shooting, and that's the way it happened. And the other inspiration, by the way, is a cooking show by David Chang called Ugly Delicious, where he travels around the world with his friends talking, and it was like chefs talking to each other. And I thought, wow, this artist just talking shop would be great. So
we've actually seen him out at one of his haunts in Las Vegas.
Oh yeah,
we've got a lot of very good Thai and Asiatic combined restaurant things out there, and we happened to see him out there with his friends one night. So
cool. Yeah,
did that.
Yeah. So that idea of people talking and casually about art. So
and then COVID hit, and then COVID happened, and so we couldn't go to galleries anymore, and couldn't talk to people in person. So now we have this format, but this has actually opened us up to a whole other kind of, not just a new format, but a whole other, here we're talking to someone in Brooklyn online, and it's very exciting. Yeah,
we've been talking to artists, Mexico City, England. I think you're our third visit to Brooklyn.
That's right.
And
then you're getting to know the neighborhood, right?
Yeah, virtually anyway. But maybe that's a good segue into, if you're okay, talking about where James Kalm came from.
Yeah.
And I know that your painting practice is sort of a parallel to that, or also explores the art world. But maybe if we talk about the James Kalm report and the sort of the creation of James Kalm as an alter ego.
Well, I hate to talk like this because it always makes me sound so old, but so I came to New York in the late 70s.
Right.
And, bumped around. I went to school at the Art Students League and got to know a few people, ended up meeting my wife there. And I met my first dealer there. And we sort of had a couple of shows. I actually had some total failure shows, nothing sold, nothing was, no reviews were written or anything like that. And I realized how tough and challenging the competition was for artists to get any kind of recognition. About the same time, the East Village was starting to take off, so that was pretty fun, and I was running around doing some things. Anyway, time moves on. That was about the same time that the AIDS epidemic started, and a whole bunch of, in certain ways, things that parallel what's happening now. Anyway, I basically had to drop out of the arts. Well, let's say I chose to drop out of the art scene to a certain extent. I had dealers that I was working with in Europe, but as far as running around the East Village and doing all that stuff, I didn't have time for it, mainly because I was raising a couple of kids and trying to get things going here and working on stuff that I was sending to Europe. But probably about in the late 90s, my wife Kate looked at me and said, you don't exist anymore in the art world. And I said, what do you mean? She says, well, you've been dropped out. I mean, it's great. You can be a soccer dad and you can, have kids, take care of all them. But if you want to be in the art scene, you got to figure out some way to make your presence known, to be part of the discourse, something. Anyway, about the same time, I had a friend that started writing for a little magazine called New York Arts. And he said, gee, you've always been annoying and opinionated and a loud mouth. You should write some stuff for this little magazine. So I started writing for them. And first I started out and I said, what can I do? And he said, look, we need somebody to write blurbs. We have listings. So they would have 300 listings, and it's like for 1 out of 5 of them, there'd be a little thing in there like, blah, 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 blah. Artist just came back from Tel Aviv where they did a series of landscape paintings of the city. So I would go out and I would write 10 or 12 of those little blurbs. So I did that for about 6 months. And then he said, look, why don't you expand that and do a couple of these like 250 words. So I did a couple 250 words. He goes, oh, that's okay. Next thing was, well, why don't you write like an 850 word thing? And so I did that. And he goes, okay, we did that for a couple months ago. And then he looked at me and said, you can write as much as you want. And so at that point, I started writing like 10,000 words a month for them. And you can find some of these articles at www.lorenmunk.com if you want to check them out. But anyway, being an artist like you guys, you also read a lot of art criticism, and you're sitting around with your friends and you're talking and you've got opinions. And of course, you're going to develop those kinds of things. So I was at a point where I was sort of thinking, how can I kind of bring this in? And people ask me, well, why do you have a pseudonym? Why do you have James Kalm?
Yeah.
And I always answer that mainly because the people in New York, the personalities that kind of sanctify the significance of your work, if they look at you and if you're not of a particular political persuasion, sexual orientation, age group, fashion thing, if you're not, eating or drinking at the right bars or whatever, you don't count. And also, if you're already somebody that's a has-been, it's like they're not going to pay any attention to you. But if it's like somebody that nobody knows who they are, and it's just, oh, gee, look, there are ideas, there are this, there are that, then they can't use their prejudices to kind of push you out of the spotlight. It's just, it's kind of the ideas and so forth exist in a different realm. So I started using the pseudonym. About the same time, I met a guy named Fong Bui. You guys are probably familiar with Fong. He publishes the Brooklyn Rail.
Okay.
Wonderful guy, very creative guy. He asked me to start writing some pieces for the Brooklyn Rail, so I started writing for them. That was great because they really have, they built a wonderful community, hundreds and hundreds of artists, and I don't even know how many thousands of artists they have featured and done reviews on, but it's a real wonderful, strong community. Through him, I started writing my own particular column on the art thing. And then probably about 2005, 2006, I bought a new little digital camera. And one day I came home and I was downloading my photos. I love to go around and take photographs of openings and works, and I would use some of them in the articles and things like that. But I came home and I was downloading stuff and I saw a little icon popped up there and I'm going, gee, what's that? I click on it, it's like, oh, it's video. So it's just my camera dangling around my neck as I'm riding the bike across the Manhattan Bridge, but I'm looking at him going, hey, that's kind of neat.
There it is, eh?
And I didn't think about it. And then a couple of weeks later, I think it was Irving Sandler published an article in the Brooklyn Rail talking about a call to critics. And his contention was that art criticism had started to go down the tubes because a lot of the newspapers were closing. People who were actually full-time or even serious art critics were being pushed out because there was no money to be made. And also there was a problem with the fact that the people that were writing criticism were basically writing it for other art critics. And so they were in this little ghetto. And so he was, the theme of the article was that he was looking for new voices, new technical things, and people that were coming at art and art criticism from something besides the academic ghetto.
Yeah.
So between the camera thing and discovering that I could do video and this article that Irving Sandler published, I was thinking, and about the same time, my boys looked at me and said, oh, gee, Dad, there's this groovy thing called YouTube. I'm like, what's that? And so I went and I looked at YouTube, and I woke up about 3 days later after watching it straight through and seeing all kinds of fantastic things. And anyway, I put all these three things together: the little camera that I could shoot video on, Irving Sandler calling for a new voice or a new way of criticizing or looking at art, and the technology of YouTube. And I said, damn,
and the bike. Don't forget the bike.
And the bike.
The biking.
And the bike.
Anyway, so I actually put out a little letter to my friends at the Brooklyn Rail saying, does anybody know how to edit videos or anything like that? And no one said anything. And I said, I think it'd be great to use YouTube to do this. And everybody's like going, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Why would anybody even you're nuts even to think about
last.
Yeah, it'll never last. No, nobody's ever going to, although besides the people on YouTube are like bad people. It's like, they're the deplorables. They're the deplorables. They're the, the enemies of the state. They're the lowest, the Walmart shoppers. These people, you don't want anything to do with them.
Right.
Which I say, all right, that's exactly my market.
That's right. Yeah.
So I started basically learning how to make videos. I had a very simple video program on Windows, Movie Maker, something like. Anyway, I started doing that.
That's what we use.
Yeah.
So as time went on, I started getting a little better cameras. I got a little better video programs. And at this point, I think I'm going into my 16th year of this, something like that.
Yeah.
And I've got over 1,500 programs, and also other programs that I post at Facebook that are not on YouTube.
Right.
And somewhere in excess of 15 million views, something like that.
It's amazing. Well, people like us, we live in Toronto. Mark goes to New York a lot more than I have, and it's like, it's so amazing to be able to walk through a gallery, and you focus up on the painting. The painters, we love that, right? The details.
Yeah.
So that's 8 by almost 10 feet. In the interview, they mention the fact that this is the largest painting that Gladys has ever done. And as I said, she kind of said, well, you get to be 80 or 79. It's like, what are you saving it for, man? You better put it out there. And she said she's got at least a couple of more big paintings in her. Okay, so we'll just kind of look at the subject matter a little bit.
For years, I would subscribe to art magazines like Art in America or the Art News, and I, of course, always run to the back of the magazine where they had the gallery openings, mostly in New York. And always disappointed because you'd see one picture at most and a brief discussion that didn't really get to the pertinent stuff, the stuff I was interested in, which was, how is this work made? What are the techniques? What's the texture? Tell me about appearances and process. And what you did, And I have to thank you. First of all, I meant to say this right up front, but I want to thank you very much for the James Kalm reports, for all of these videos. We're not just fans, we're students, as it were.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
You would take us into the galleries. We would look at each painting. You look at each painting very carefully. You talk as an artist looking at these works. What's the texture? What are the materials? What's the size? What's the composition about? Potential allusions to other works, things like that, which you don't get from a typical review in a typical art magazine or other kind of art media. And that more than fills a void for us. That's like, it's like, it just doesn't get any better than that. And
well, thank you.
I don't have to subscribe to magazines anymore. Plus, I would read a review, or I'd read a review and go, "Oh, I wish I was in New York right now. I wish I could see this show." And then, you know, it would show up on your report a month later, and I'd be like, "Here I can go. I can sit and watch it now."
Well,
So,
usually I'm a month ahead of all the hard copy people. Sometimes, like Art in America, I'm like 6 months ahead of those guys.
That's right.
No, that's very nice of you to say that, Mark. Thank you. One of the things that was always part of my mission was to come to the paintings not as a pure aesthete, you know. So I mean, I can do that if I want to, but I basically come to them as a painter, and I feel my basic audience, at least I'm hoping, anybody that wants to look at them and can take whatever they want from them,
sure,
wonderful. But basically, I feel like I'm like an old painter dude that you go to an opening with, you know, have a beer and you walk around the show and you sort of look at things and you point at this or that and you sort of talk about various things. And the other side to it is, I think people have criticized me for going to the openings and spending too much time, maybe, or it's too noisy or it's distracting or something like that. But I also have the feeling that, especially for people, you guys live in Toronto, so there is an art scene there, and there are galleries and there are openings and stuff, but I get emails from people in the middle of Australia or New Zealand or, you know, South Africa or places like that where they don't get a chance to go to things like that. So for me, it's like important to not only show the paintings and the art, but it's also important, and that's part of what my painting practice is about, is to let people know that there's a whole community of people. There's a whole social structure of all this stuff. It's not just about an artifact sitting somewhere. It's about this whole family, a tribe or whatever, that has come together and somehow put this together. And it's not just the artist and the painting, but there are the dealers and the critics and the collectors and the students, and everybody else is sort of pushing this thing together and pushing it down the timeline. So that was always important for me.
And you've always captured the vibe of an opening so well, right? You
That's
feel like
what I
you're
like,
there,
yes.
you're immersed, the viewer is immersed in that vibe, and it's a really exciting feeling for people like us, for artists and art fans. And I mean, one thing I wanted to ask is, in terms of like when you first started versus the way it is now, and, you know, COVID aside, I mean, I remember times you know, times where you were rushing through the Whitney because you were afraid you're going to get caught, and as soon as you get caught, that's it, you're out. Now they open their doors to you, it seems. I don't know if policies have changed or if just you are now well known enough, and the Kalm report is well known enough that they're opening their doors.
No.
No?
I find in certain ways it's kind of like The Simpsons, you know, it's all this stuff that you watch, turn on an episode of The Simpsons, you know, watch something and it's like, oh my God, and like Lisa and Bart get eaten by space aliens, and Homer gets like a nail through his head and is dead and is buried and all. And then the next episode, it's like, oh, they're back to they're still sitting on the couch. They start out and it's like the same thing. That's kind of like the institutions here in New York, that no matter what happens, it's sort of like no, they don't remember what happened last week. I mean, it's like, no, it's like you're just another schlub walking through and doing your thing. I would also say, and this goes to what you're talking about, Charles, when you got a new cell phone and it had a great camera in there, one of the things is if they tried to stop everybody from doing things with their cell phone, they would have no time to do anything else because everybody now has a cell phone.
Right.
Every cell phone has a video camera in there. You can go in there, you can click onto things, and you could be doing this stuff all running this online live.
Right.
And what are they going to do? It's very hard for these people to kind of clamp down on all this stuff. So in a certain way, the technology has changed. I think the other thing is that, and I'm very lucky that I was kind of part of the first wave of this stuff, in that I think I kind of influenced the way people use the technology in a certain way, or at least
Definitely.
maybe the perception of what you could do with that as far as showing art, talking about it, maybe coming up close with a close up and say, pointing, yeah, you see the way this drips down here, which means that this canvas was turned another way when they were doing something else, or, you know, little things like that. I think I've had a tiny little bit of influence.
Yeah, and they don't have to be like the setup, like the Louisiana channel, you know, where it's like someone in a chair and stationary, boring as hell.
I mean, I get a lot of criticism. One of them is that you're moving the camera too fast, you know, and that's kind of a couple of things. One of them was you're moving the camera too fast. The other one is there's too much noise at these openings, and you're hearing, I mean, these people are talking in the background, and it's like, we don't want. And I look at them and I go, well, that's kind of like someone saying, well, look, we like Jackson Pollock, but except for the drips. You know?
Well, you know, or, you know, there's a volume button, right?
Yeah.
Turn the volume if you don't want to hear the.
And if it's too fast, you just click it and stop. You can stop
Right.
the frame and look at it.
Or you're
again,
at,
you know,
or you're
and
at a
spend as
rock
much time as you
concert
want.
and the crowd is singing along. This is annoying. I just want to hear the band.
That's right. I want to hear the band.
Right.
Yeah.
But all that stuff is important to me because I feel like you are documenting this for posterity. And as I was saying, that cultural relationship is all part of what art is. And that's one of the messages that I want to try to put out there.
Just watching an interview earlier today of you talking to, and I forget her name, but you're talking about some of your paintings, the map paintings, and your interest in the art communities and the, you know, the I think you called it the dark matter, the, you know, the stuff that gets sucked away by the kind of the machinery of like what's new,
By the system.
popular.
Yeah.
The system. And
The institutions.
and so I love your paintings. I love I mean, who doesn't love maps and charts and flow charts?
Well, a lot of people apparently. I mean,
So I know
95% of the people in the New York gallery scene can't stand them. So yeah, those are the people that don't like them.
Yeah, right. Maybe because it's about them. I don't know, but it's just, you know, like the one just behind you there. It's so colorful. It's information, but it's design too, right? Like it reminds me of
the big movements,
sign paintings and.
There is a certain amount of sign painting in there, and the mapping and the diagramming, that's all part of it. And then you try to beef it up with color.
Various, you know, in terms of the big movements, one thinks of pop, but also one thinks of conceptualism. There's also, I mean, color field because of the emphasis on color. So you're bringing together these kinds of historical constructs, but you're also commenting on those constructs at the same time.
Yes.
It's a fascinating interplay that you're doing. And can you talk to us a little bit about that and how? I mean, I don't know what you were doing in back when you were an art student or in your earlier days, but how you came into this particular approach. And this,
I just wanted to add to that. So I was like searching the internet for, you know, earlier Loren Munk stuff, and I did come across some of the stuff that looked more like neo-expressionistic and very textural, and which I also love. I love it. Remind me of Terrence Lanois stuff. I don't know if you know him. Just like, oh man. And then wondered how that transition happened from that more,
Expressionism to this. Yeah.
Yeah.
To the,
Well, I gave you kind of a little brief rundown when I was talking about how James Kalm came about, and I started doing the videos. Well, I moved here in 1979 from Idaho. Before that, I'd spent 3 years, well, 2.5 years in Germany on the GI Bill. Came here, went to school at the Art Students League. But, you know, coming from Idaho, I didn't know anybody in New York, and I didn't know anybody that knew anybody that knew anybody that was in New York. So I was like a baby born on 57th Street. And I had to start making all of my connections, I'd seen enough great art, because when I was in Europe, I basically spent all my free time going to museums and studying art there, and I was painting in my barracks and things like that. Anyway, so I got to New York and I started running around with a certain group of people. Went to Soho. Soho was just sort of starting to get real solidified. Started hanging out there a little bit. And it was also about the time that there were the first inklings of the East Village thing. So it was kind of fortuitous for me in that a lot of the importance that people were looking for at that particular time, a lot of that stuff was coming out of Europe. So when the German expressionists, the Neue Wilden or the Heftig painters kind of broke on the scene with Kiefer and Baselitz and Lupertz and all those guys, I'd already been seeing that stuff in Germany, years before. And so I had kind of a taste of that. Also, have always been a big fan of American modernism, at least a certain branch of American modernism. And I would have to say that one of my godfathers would be someone like Stuart Davis.
Yes.
That I love.
I see that.
Anyway, as things started to take off, everybody's looking for their little niche somewhere in the art world. I started getting involved more in the downtown scene, doing some painting about the same time. I had been going to school at the Art Students League, but my GI Bill was running out. So I ended up going to work at a place called Utrecht, an art store. And one of the jobs that I had was I was driving their truck. So I would drive to Brooklyn to the factory. I'd pick up tons of paint and canvas and boards and crayons and all that stuff, and I'd bring it back in town. Then I would spend my afternoons a lot of times driving around various neighborhoods delivering stuff to people like Sandro Chia and Julian Schnabel, people like that, up and down. A lot of them were unknown artists, people that I loved that have since drifted off into obscurity. But as I started to get more and more involved in this, I started realizing, okay, art movements are sort of done this way, and if you want to get some kind of a historical traction, you have to have something going. So at some point, there were a couple of people that I was, not that I was friendly with, but I kind of was sympathetic to their aesthetic, and they were doing kind of shiny things, glittery things, and so there was a kind of a little mini movement called kitsch art. Some of it was kind of coming out of feminism, kind of pattern decorative and expressionism, except it was all kind of pushed to the point where it just became like so over the top that people found it repugnant. And that was part of the fun of it. Anyway, so I was doing that, and
sort of a punk aesthetic too.
It was. Anyway, so I pushed that for a while, and at that point, I also came up with a kind of an idea that, in a certain way, was kind of a harbinger for what I'm doing now. But I started making these paintings that had frames painted onto them, And then the frames actually started to become kind of built on them, and they had a lot of mirrors and gold leaf, and they were raised, and they became very heavy and extravagant. And I realized at the time that in a certain way it was kind of a parody of a painting. And even at the time, I realized that a lot of people, it's like they don't understand what a painting is, but they understand what a frame is.
Right.
You know, it's sort of like, oh, gee, that was such a crappy painting, but that frame is great, man. I love the frame. And I'll put that up, and it's like I don't even see the painting, but I see that great Baroque frame with the gold leaf, and it's so on. So anyway, so I was kind of playing on that, and I just kept sort of distilling things down and distilling them down. And as I said, I was a big fan of Stuart Davis, and one of the other things is that I love historical references, so I started to go, rather than going like the German expressionists into more brushy, splashy kinds of things, I was going into more of a cubist kind of thing. You know, neo-expressionism took off, but neo-cubism didn't really go anywhere until recently, you know, and I see people doing work, you know, Dana Schutz is someone that's been kind of dabbling in cubism in the last 4 or 5 years, and I look at the work and go,
a little bit.
yeah, where were you, you know, 30 years ago when I was doing this? Anyway, and then I think, so I'm working and trying to support a family, and it's very tough. And, you know, if my wife wasn't there to like back me up on all this stuff and support me for a lot of the stuff, you know, the raising the kids and all this other stuff, I could never have done any of this stuff. Anyway, then when 9/11 happened, I had people that I'd been working with in Europe for years, and they sort of came and said, you know, all of our collectors and the people that we work with, the people that have collected your work, we used to like you because you were so American, and we just thought that was really cool. But you know, the stuff that is happening now, and like the president is doing things, we don't like Americans. Our collectors don't like Americans anymore. Right. So, you know, unless you can change or do something else, it's like, you're done. You know, it's like we're not going to deal with
your own style.
Yeah. So at that point, I was thinking, and a lot of the time, I mean, if you guys, I don't know how much you've been involved with the art market, but I think one of the things that's kind of heartbreaking is you see someone that comes in and they're interesting and they're passionate and they're doing innovative work, and then the art market latches onto them, and pretty soon it's like they've got this product that has been branded as their product, and then it's like, okay, we just have 5 people in the studio cranking out your product.
Yes,
absolutely.
We'll get, you know, as much of this stuff out there. If you can have 3 or 4 or 5 shows, you know, we got to have a show for New York, and then we got to have one in LA and one in London, and we got to have one in Beijing, and, you know, and so you've got to, you know, have some kind of a factory.
Yeah, yeah. It's a
my apologies to Warhol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I never got to the point where I had assistants, but it was kind of like you have a branded thing that you're doing, but it's not as much fun. I mean, you can do it, and it's beautiful, and it's wonderful, and it's a good product. It's a good artifact, but it's not maybe what is going to keep you impassioned enough to keep doing it without the market driving these things. I mean,
well, I would think,
of course, if you have to do that to make your living, you'll do that. You'll be a slave, and you'll do that. And I know a lot of people who do that. I didn't, you know, after 9/11 and my European friends went away, I spent about 2 years just thinking, what am I going to do? This is, you know, terrible. And then I decided, you know what, I should do what I always loved, which was looking at and thinking about the art community and how this all came together, the people. And part of it goes back to my days of driving the delivery truck for Utrecht and going to people's studios and talking to them and hauling in the paint for them, and then looking at what they were doing and seeing where they were on the map. So when I was driving around, I would know, okay, so these people are on, you know, East 10th Street, and so-and-so's on Wooster Street. And so I knew how to drive around there. So I started to just say that's what I want to work with. That's my subject matter. And so
And it doesn't
it's
seem like there's anyone else doing that, or at least not to the extent that you're doing that, right? In terms of
very few. There are a couple of people that I have, like I said, aesthetic tastes that align,
right.
but not too many. And
Right.
part of it is, a lot of it is not, it's not fun. You know, because I end up spending, like today, I probably spent about 5 hours
Yeah.
researching little galleries that have gone out of business 10 years ago, and trying to find out, well, who founded this gallery? When did they found it? Who did they show? Where did they move to? You know, and it's not
Right.
fun. It's not fun, but it's
great.
very, very interesting. At least for
But
me,
it's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's scholarly, right? It's like a form of scholarship.
Well,
Well,
it's probably the bad side of scholarship, because
But-
the academics hate. Well, some of them like it. A lot of the people don't like it because there's no money. I mean, it's not like people are calling me up and say, "Oh, gee, that is so trendy. I want to have that on my wall
Sure.
over my Royer couch." You know, they're not going to do that. It's just like, and they look at me and they go, "Why would anybody give a crap about, like, this painting behind me? Why would anybody give a crap about the Bowery and the galleries that were there in 1963? Why would anybody? I mean, that's not like hanging, I don't know, anime naked girls and you know, a Ferrari thing together on your wall. I mean, that's cool, but this stuff, forget it, man.
But it is very meta. It's very reflective. It's you're chronicling the history of New York and the New York art scenes.
I'm
Yes.
surprised there's a bit more. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I'm wondering, I just maybe talk about like what the scene is like, and you live in Brooklyn, right?
Yes, I do.
What the scene is like now in Brooklyn.
Like in the COVID
Well, or just
pandemic, or in general?
contemporary. You know, I know it's always changing, and different neighborhoods seem to, become the up and coming neighborhood. And
Yes. Okay, I'll give you a brief rundown. And I've been getting a lot of flack for this. Probably, I was talking about the East Village art scene and all that stuff. So the East Village probably ran from about 1978 till 1988, and then it crashed, and part of it was the AIDS epidemic and some other things.
Sure.
Also, then Chelsea started to pop up, and a lot of the galleries, the established galleries in Soho, started to move to Chelsea.
Yes.
But there was kind of a resistance movement, or a more authentic movement that was taking place in Williamsburg.
Yes.
So that kind of, during the 90s into the late 90s, that started to bloom. And at one point, I think maybe one of my maps, I've got maybe 90 galleries or something like that were in Williamsburg. Okay, meanwhile, Chelsea went to a point where they had, gosh, I think 340 galleries or something like that. What ends up happening is that as soon as you have a neighborhood where the artists move in and the galleries move in and the clubs move in, then the real estate developers move in, and they realize, oh, gee, it's so great. The young and upcoming and energetic artists like move into these neighborhoods with the best of intentions, and they go in and they kind of, with like the good old, Boy Scout or whatever attitude, you go in and it's like, oh, let's help clean up the neighborhood, and we could do so much for the local people and blah, blah, blah. And they do.
Yeah.
But in a certain way, they also like break up that hardcore ethnic neighborhoods that have been there for the last 70 or 80 years.
Mhm.
And they're sort of a wedge. And a lot of the real estate developers, politicians, and people that benefit from gentrification
Yes.
realize that the artists are a very valuable tool. So as I was saying, Williamsburg has started, you know, late 90s, it starts to take off. So that's great. At some point, there are probably at least 80 galleries that are operating on a regular basis, and maybe another 30 or 40 or 50 that are out there on the weekends here and there. But as the gentrification started to kick in, Williamsburg became a very attractive place. So you had a lot of buildings that have been old mustard factories or things like that. And developers look at that and go, shit, that's just sitting there. It's a shambles. We go in, we buy it for a pittance, and we throw this, you know, put a condo tower up there. We can make billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And they did. And they basically, within a period of about 3 years, turned Williamsburg into a housing project. I was looking at statistics, but it was amazing. It was something like over a 5-year period, there was something like 12,000 new apartments that opened up in this neighborhood that isn't that big.
Really? Yeah, yeah.
So what ended up happening is then everybody sort of got pushed farther east into another neighborhood called Bushwick.
Bushwick, yes.
And so Bushwick had its little blossom, and I kind of feel like the midwife of Bushwick. Because as I said, I started writing for the Brooklyn Rail, and very perceptive editor that I had there, John Yao, wonderful poet, great poet, had this idea. It's like, you should be doing something that's not just art criticism, but it's more about how the art and the communities are sort of interreacting. So I for about 5 or 6 or 7 years, I did the, what was it, the Brooklyn Dispatches. And I talked about what was happening and how a gallery in Williamsburg moved to Bushwick or something else happened and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so Bushwick, probably, I started covering it in 2003. So it was very interesting because I was actually starting from the very beginning of a little art community like that. And between 2003 and I would say probably about 2016 or 2017, I had a chance to see the whole cycle of what happens to a community, to a neighborhood when, you know, I think.
When artists move in.
Yeah, well, at Bushwick, there's a lot of
when galleries move
Puerto
in.
Rican people and Dominican people and people from Haiti, and they'd been there, you know,
decades.
Probably since West Side Story, maybe
right.
before then, you know. So it's like
post-war
the Sharks
period.
and the Jets stuff.
Yeah.
But they had been there, and they had families. In some of these buildings, you had like the grandma and the grandpa, and then the mom and dad and the kids and the grandkids, and they were all in the same building. And they worked at the, you know, the plumbing store around the corner, or they were working at the grocery store on the other block, and they all had been doing this for years. And suddenly you get these people that are Yale and Harvard grads and stuff like that.
Wall Streeters and techies moving.
Yeah, and suddenly they're paying, I don't know what, $300 or $400 a month in rent. And suddenly someone comes in and goes, "Oh, gee, man, I need $2,500 a month. I need $3,000 a month for the rental on this stuff." And it's like, we can't do that, you know. And anyway, so I saw from the beginning till the well, it's not over. People get upset if I say it's over. From say 2003 to 2017, 18, I got a chance to see what happened in a place like Bushwick that goes from kind of low-rise housing and a lot of commercial stuff into also becoming like Williamsburg, a place where they've got the condo towers and the boutiques and the, you know, trendy clubs and stuff like that. And but at this point, they, like I say, I have too many friends, and they complain if I say that it's over. But as far as a dynamic, growing, vibrant community where people could go and risk things and fail and make mistakes and do all kinds of crazy stuff, it is over. And so there are still little things happening around the edges and other kinds of things. And there are other places in Brooklyn where people are opening small galleries and things like that. But in a lot of, and then, as I said, Bushwick was already kind of on its last legs, and then the COVID thing happens, and boy, it's totally been shut down for about 5 months now, 5.5 months, and I don't know whether it'll be able to come back after that kind of tragedy.
Sorry, go ahead.
As far as other things go, the Lower East Side is now a very interesting neighborhood, although it's also going through its own problems.
Did it gentrify too? Did it gentrify?
Yes, it is getting gentrified, but
the Bowery, I passed through the Bowery last summer. It was unrecognizable. We passed on either side 2 massive chandelier shops. I was driving there with my daughter, and I was saying, this area, this is near where CBGB was and the punk scene and so forth. It was not like that.
It's all on the map. No, that was another kind of thing. On the other hand, you can't stay in the past. You can't even stay in the present. Time is constantly clicking away. That's one of the beautiful things, the wonderful things about art is that it's constantly going along.
Yeah.
And this is what is important about what you guys are doing, and what I try to do is that if you can capture a little bit of this and you can somehow push it forward so that people in the future will be able to look back and go, oh gosh, yeah, that was really interesting and blah, blah, blah. But we're here now, but I can see where this and this and this kind of led to this and this and this, where we're at now. That I think helps civilization.
Scan over the installation. I started seeing Peter's work. In the late 70s at the Alan Frumkin Gallery on 57th Street. And, well, I've been watching him over the years, and I would say I am a fan. It's also been interesting to watch his career arc over the last 30 or 40 years.
So it has been important for me to try to get out, and I get emails from people. They make me happy, but they also kind of hit my heart, because it's like, oh man, we have been locked down, blah, 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 blah. We don't get to do this. Having you out there and showing us this latest gallery thing that was last Wednesday is so fantastic. Please keep doing it. I'm thinking to myself, would they like, please keep doing this, even if you get sick? And it's like, I'm not going to go that far.
Your life for our aesthetic needs.
We will push you out there and in the virus, and as long as you're between the virus and us, that's great. But I have a job to do, and I feel like I'm doing that. And it's not just for my friends, because people all over the world, and that's why I think what you guys are doing is very important. Because that's what art's about. Is like
we're riding your coattails. That we're totally riding your coattails.
In Canada or Toronto, like there's hardly no art journalism left. It's
right.
All the newspapers, they've people left and they never hired anybody. There's a couple of art magazines, but so I feel the urgency all the more. And
like I said, go look for that article by Irving Sandler. I think it's called Call to Critics, and read it, because this is like 15 years ago, but it will give you an insight as to why you're doing and why what you're doing is so important.
And I love the DIY approach. Right? They don't need the gatekeepers anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's one of the beautiful things about it, is that the the academics or the market gatekeepers,
Whatever they are.
they've lost their
Curators.
power, and they hate it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm thinking that they tried to scare the crap out of everybody with this. I mean, admittedly, you know, I'm here in Brooklyn, and I am maybe 2.5 blocks from one of the senior centers where there was a cluster of old people that got COVID and passed away. I think there was 58 or 59 of them.
Right.
Mhm.
And so of course I feel bad. Does that mean that I'm going to, like, you know, stay under my blankets in a fetal position in the morning, just like stay locked inside? I can't do that.
No, we
No, and
can't
I
give
think
into fear. We can't give into fear. I mean, there's a big difference between pragmatism and just being afraid all the time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, the other part to that is I was actually trained as a medic
No.
during the Vietnam War.
Wow.
So I didn't go to Vietnam.
Okay.
I went to Germany,
Okay.
but I was trained a little bit on how
you
you
have-
kind of manage these kinds of things, and sanitation and
Sure.
cleanliness and the sterile field and how these things are spread. So I have a certain idea that, okay, if you do certain things, you're not going to be 100% safe, but you're going to reduce your chances down to 96 or 97% safe. And at that point you say, well, can I get back to my mission of trying to, like, bring art to people if it's 97% safe? And you go, yeah, okay, I'll take the chance. And besides, hey, if I get COVID and I drop dead, it's like, that's going to be like the final line on my resume is like, yeah, he was out and he loved art so much that he did sacrifice himself to
Died
bring
doing what he
Died.
loved.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, I think we should probably part because we got lots for our episode. It's been so great chatting with you,
Oh, it's fantastic.
and just keep on writing and shooting and filming. I'm gonna edit that.
And I want to we got to
filming.
thank you again, not just for joining us tonight, but for doing what you do. It's been
Well,
fantastic.
thank you, Charles and Mark. And as I said, I think what you're doing is very important. I spent time in Toronto. I think that there's a lot of groovy stuff. You know, I just love art history, and one of the things that I think people need to do is spend more time looking at what their cultural legacy is and how valuable that is. And, you know, COVID is going to come, it's going to go. We're going to be looking, well, I don't know if I'm going to be here in 20 years, but people are going to be looking back in 20 years and going, God, you remember that? Oh, that was such a pain in the ass. Yeah, then it just went away and blah, blah, blah. We went back to the same old kind of thing in a different way.
Yeah.
And I just think we're going to still say, yeah, you know, that painting was done, or, you know, that poetry was done, or that dance thing was, or that novel was written during that period. And it's like, okay, that's groovy. We love that. That's part of our history. And let's move on to the future.
Absolutely.
Yes,
All right.
exactly.
On that note, Lauren.
Thanks,
Take care,
Thank you
man.
very much.
Charles and Mark.
Okay.
It's been an incredible pleasure for us. Thank you.
L'chaim.
L'chaim.